Well, hello everyone. This is Jason Zeidema of ICMA, the International Christian Maritime Association. And today I'm speaking with Dr. Max Johns, who is Senior Advisor for Social and Labor Affairs for the German Shipowners Association. He's Chairperson of the Labor Affairs Committee for the International Chamber of Shipping. And he's also Professor for Maritime Management at the Hamburg Business School. And he's speaking with us from his office near Hamburg, Germany. Welcome, Dr. Johns.
Hi, Jason.
So we're speaking today to understand the impacts of coronavirus on the shipping industry. It's a large industry to begin with. It's a major crisis. Can you outline for us what are some of the key things that the coronavirus has been disrupting in the maritime industry in the past weeks?
Yes, the coronavirus has actually disrupted the maritime industry only to a small extent, and we have seen a very diverse picture. We've seen, on the one hand, on very extreme negative impacts, and strangely, we've also seen hugely positive impacts. On the negative side, very obviously, the greatest negative impact has been for seafarers. Seafarers have, to the tens of thousands, be confined to the vessels and could not leave and could not get home when there was a crew change supposed to happen. That was probably the most severe impact. And economically, we had the cruise industry, which had the worst hits, and they were worst hit because cruises had to be stopped for several weeks, possibly for several more weeks, and there is now optimistic forecast for the cruise industry to restart slowly by the middle or end of June, optimistically. So that part of the industry has been very hard hit. The most extreme part of the industry on the other side has been the tanker industry, the tanker shipping, where due to a very complicated mix of political and economic influences, the oil prices have tanked, and now oil is very cheap. There's a lot of oil being shipped around the world, and tankers are in desperate need. So tankers are earning a lot of money, and they have a lot of cargo, and that part of the industry is earning more money than ever, actually. But that's only a small part of the industry. Then there are all the other vessels in the middle, where the seafarers are heavily impacted economically. Bulkers, containers, multi-purpose ships, and so have been hit, but not very heavily. The very positive part is the supply chains have been maintained. The world is still being supplied with food, with industry goods, with telephones, with everything we need. So there's no shortage of that, but there's less cargo because a lot of people ashore have lost their jobs. So there is a demand which is lower than before. So people can afford to buy less, so we can only transport less. But it's not as if now the entire container industry is breaking down. There is less demand, there is less to transport, and that's to the extent of like 20% currently. So there's 20% less containers to be transported right now. They'll get back, certainly not to normal very quickly, but it will improve sometime in the second part of last year, of this year, probably. But that's a forecast which is very difficult to make.
Besides the cruise segment of the industry, do you think there will be any really specific challenges in either in bulk or containers or whatnot? We're on a few calls, and sometimes there's the questions of abandonments or just companies going into great duress. Do you see that actually happening, that the coronavirus will cause any companies to have just too much stress on their company?
Yes, it is a classical difficult economic situation, and which is more easily said than seen in reality. That means that some companies will have to leave the market. Yes, we will see a number of ships in layup. We see already a spike in layups for container ships. There'll probably be other types of vessels in layup also. That means there will be less jobs for seafarers. There may be some companies going very quickly bankrupt, so that maybe some seafarers will be abandoned, but that's highly speculative. At the same time, we also see a lot of governments supporting at least part of the maritime industry. We see that in Asia, we see that in Europe. We see it pretty much all over the place, and we will see how much of that money will really trickle down to the companies and eventually to the employees. So it seems that a lot of governments are determined that seafarers and maritime companies are important for supply chain, for supplying the countries as such. But there is no doubt a number of companies will go out of business, and that will be disruptive for a number of people. But for the time being, we haven't seen that yet happening, but because there is still cash available, there's still money in the financial markets available, but that'll dry out eventually when the picture will clear up.
So in the last decade or so, and here, this is where I'd love your expertise on this question. It hasn't necessarily always been easy for many shipping companies to make enough money. There's been a significant oversupply of ships in certain segments of the market. I'm wondering, is this coronavirus crisis going to solve potentially some of those issues that we've been hearing about in the industry in the last decade?
It's probably not solving anything. Maybe some policymakers will become more realistic, because we have two things. In the real markets out there, we had an oversupply of ships. That's why a lot of shipping companies could not earn enough money during the last decade. If we would leave the markets completely alone, then a lot of shipping companies would have gone out of business. A lot of ships would have been in layup, and eventually the freight rates would have gone up. However, we've seen also activities by governments, actually with the best intentions, to put a lot of money into shipbuilding. And that is where a lot of overcapacity has been created. Governments wanted to support the shipbuilding industry because tens of thousands of people are employed there. And the intentions were very valuable, very positive. They wanted to keep these people in jobs, and eventually they made ships relatively inexpensive. And so more ships have been ordered also over the last decade than should have been by pure market economics. So we still have a slightly oversupplied market. We still have slightly too many ships, and it now depends if governments will continue to support the shipbuilding industry with billions of dollars, like the Korean government has indicated they are willing to do. And if they do it, probably other shipbuilding nations will be doing the same thing. That means we will continue to have what I would call an oversupply of vessels, and that will perpetuate the low freight rates. Of course, the opposite is cruel. The opposite would be a layoff of a lot of workers on the shipyards, would be shipping companies going bankrupt and ships in layup, and then 3, 4, 5 years later we would have better balanced markets. But of course, a lot of governments don't want to see that, and that is the reason that could happen now, that governments eventually run out of money because they have to pour so much money into various parts of the economy that maybe shipping falls off in the end.
A last question. I know you don't have a crystal ball, but knowing sort of the future from now, I mean, best guess scenarios, informed guess scenarios, where are we perhaps 6 months from now? What do you think are the key things that either have to happen or might happen as we progress going on from here?
It depends very much on the parts of the market, and just to take the 4 biggest parts of the market, it's in container shipping, we will be in a rebound most likely, but a U-shaped, a very slow one. So we will have regained the old normal to, let's say, 50, 60, 70% or so, but we will be slightly below that still. Of course, the normal traffic is still there and supply chains will work. In the bulk market, we will probably also be more or less balanced. That depends a bit if companies have really restarted all their industrial production, if construction work has restarted, that'll be very important there. The tanker market is the most difficult to predict because it has run havoc in the last couple of weeks. It's heaven right now. It'll go down. It'll be probably normalized by then, depending a little bit on what OPEC and other oil-producing countries will do. And finally, the cruise market will be on a very slow restart. But my guess is that the cruise industry will probably have the most difficult part. My assumption is that tourists will be hesitant to go on a cruise ship very soon again in large numbers, on the numbers we've seen until 3 months ago. And maybe that's also a part where some locations will be more hesitant to accept as many cruise ships as they've done in the past. That may account for the Caribbean, that may certainly account for Europe. We have a couple of cities, and the most vocal being Venice, saying they wanted to reduce the number of cruise ships, and this may be the time. If they come out with that, then cruise lines will have to reduce or entirely change their services and their offerings, and that will only gain traction in the market over time. So that'll not be a very quick recovery, I guess.
Well, thank you, Dr. Max Johns. Thank you for your time and for your insight. No doubt we could continue this to learn more, but this is great to have just an overview of some of the impacts of coronavirus in the shipping industry.
Thank you, Jason.